If you don't change a pattern that you're aware of, it will demolish you physiologically. The cost of unrealized potential and unlived truths is that you will pay for it in your body, your anxiety, your mind. Are you willing to pay the price? And some people say yes. I'm just not, because what happens when you create that gap where you're not listening to something you know is then you need something to numb that feeling. If you really want your future relationships to feel mutual, you have to change first. Waiting for someone who's avoidant to change is, you might as well just watch paint dry.
Alrighty, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Enheartened. Today, I am sitting with the relational powerhouse, and also, let me put it this way, a devotee of truth. If you've been tuning into this show, you know that truth is a big value of mine, and it has been leading some of the ways I do the very best I can to show up. And I really think that most relationships that are not rooted in truth fail. Inevitably. I have the honor of sitting with Mark Groves, and I thought about all the ways I could really introduce Mark, but there is something that stood out for me. The title of your book, you said Liberated Love. And in there, the liberated that you put before love, it really spoke to me because it brings up a it speaks to the value for freedom and truth that you really emanate. That's how I see you. I've been following your work for years, and this is what you embody. And this is something that I've wanted to bring to this podcast. So, Mark Groves, thank you for what you represent, and thank you for coming on Enheartened.
Well, thanks so much for such a generous introduction. I really hold a deep value for just holding truth as a priority over everything, and at the cost of, everything, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't curate our truths appropriately, or also not be open to being wrong about what we believe is true. I think actually, like, at the core of relationships that honor speaking truth first, there also has to be the willingness that has to be held of not being right. And at the end of the day, that's actually the richness of relationship, any kind, is that the diversity of thought enriches the relationship, but also you make sort of the goal of both being so open and transparent to discover a deeper truth that only exists through the mergers of two different perspectives, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there's something you've said there about the cost of, being devoted to truth. And I wonder, in your relational experience, personal, professional experience as well, what that has been like for you to sometimes see, okay, truth sometimes comes with collaterals.
Yeah, I mean, romantically, when the other person is not aligned with that dedication, then of course, yeah, it disrupts family systems. If all of a sudden you're willing to talk about the alcoholic father, or the, let's say, narcissistic mother, or the absent parent, whatever it is, the whole system of the family is designed around accommodating that person from a survival-based perspective. So when one person, who is often seen as the black sheep of the family, points at that thing, the system then has to change or attack the person who's speaking truth, who's finally pointing to the elephant in the room. And I think that example is also true culturally and in society, is if you point at this thing that people have from a survival-based perspective, or maybe it causes too much dissonance, whatever it is, we don't want to acknowledge that thing. And so we attack the truth teller. But that's like every movement, every profound change in culture and society begins with someone who's like a lonely naysayer. And I think what's really interesting about the human psyche is we're constantly assessing, if I'm going to speak this truth or say this thing, I know that I'm putting belonging at risk, because this is what society thinks, or the majority of people. And so now I'm going to say this thing, but what we don't realize, there's always the first person who does it, and usually the first person who does it at great cost. And so and they actually might do it and not even realize you're not allowed to do it till,
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
attacks it. But what's interesting is when this person does this very brave thing, it invites a second person to do a brave thing, and then a third. And that's why it's so contagious, like this dedication to truth. I think the place we can get stuck is without curiosity or without flexibility or um, being open to influence. Like one of the greatest predictors of relationship success is that you're open to the influence of your partner. And
Yeah.
I think that's very true of friendships and family and culture is like, are we open to being influenced? Because a lot of the times let's say we're bringing something with family and we're like bringing forward a truth. What the family can do is all of a sudden attack that one person, right? And so when it can be natural for us to want to go back to what we used to be in the family, it can be natural for us to go back to being silent. And I think it can also be very natural for us to become very rigid in
Yeah.
what we're standing for, which is sometimes really healthy, right? Like if all of a sudden we're standing for the alcoholic and saying like, hey, you got to get sober, I'm not going to participate anymore, we actually need to be rigid in it. But once we move to other families, and we see this with people who, they say stuff like, well, this is just who I am, and they self-express with no openness. And it makes sense that that's true in their family, but when they try to create really productive relationships, it's not the best.
Yeah. What I hear you basically reflect there is the combination of two attributes, which is first, you got to know where your spine is, and your heart can also not be so harshly closed. It's like it
Yeah.
needs a certain degree of openness, but at the same time, you need to be in touch with your spine and know where you stand. Would you say that it represents the combination of energies you're sharing now?
Yeah, that's so well said. Like it has I think about it as these two archetypes, which I think overlap really well with attachment styles, which I know everyone just likes frameworks. So it's like someone who's more anxiously attached, I see really containing more of they're an overexpressed child. So you could feel the energy of anxious attachment is really young. And then you have the more avoidant style, which is more distant, more the island, more assertive. And so what happens with that one is more, I like to think of the archetype as the warrior, much like you're saying, the spine, the heart and the
Yeah.
spine, similar thing. And it's like if you're too much warrior, you're all walls, you're all attack, you're all
Yeah.
protection. And that actually is so important when you're young, but you can get stuck in that. And if you're
Yeah.
all child, all heart, I mean, you're going to get in a van with a stranger for candy, right? So we have
Yeah.
to have this balance. And the more because it's always a challenge to develop what you're less of. So if I start to develop more access to boundaries and voice, so embodying that spine, what happens is that I'm I'm going to create more trust to open my heart more,
Yeah.
but society has this strange narrative about anxiously attached people or people who are more open-hearted, right? That's how it would be seen.
Yeah.
Is that like, but they just love all out. The world is the bad place that doesn't accommodate their just spilly openness. And I always think, well, that's not taking responsibility that not everyone needs to know everything about you. And not everyone is actually safe to love. Like that's such an important thing to discern.
Yes. Would you say there is some form of naivete at the core of it, which is I can just walk out there with my heart completely exposed, and the world needs to accommodate to this. I want to say, to me it feels a lot like emotional fragility to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So
fully agree.
yeah. So I want to get into an aspect of what you shared before that felt maybe personal, but that was my impression. So I want you to clarify if this is actually personal. I have a sense that to be good at the work you do, you have to be also really good at pointing at the unpopular stuff that usually people don't want to look at. When it comes to relational dynamics, when it comes to the issues that are plaguing connection, So I wonder if it has been part of your story to be the one, the bearer of unpopular truths, the one that will usually invite or the one that will point the elephant in the room.
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't know I was going to be doing that, but yeah, it has been that experience. I mean, when I went through a breakup in my late 20s, I was engaged. I didn't think that that would be sort of the beginning of this desire to really understand relationship. It was really just more of an obsession of trying to understand it for myself so I could finally like make sense of who I was choosing, why I was unavailable to really good people, why I was terrified of getting married, like all these things. I at the time was a pharmaceutical rep and I really loved learning about human behavior. And so I was obsessed with understanding it, but I wondered, why am I good at that stuff but not this relationship stuff? That doesn't make sense. They're the same skill set for the most part, but I couldn't translate them. I could sometimes, but not when hurt was on the line, not when I needed to choose myself. And so what I noticed when I left that engagement is I felt more connected to myself than I ever had, but yet I felt more judged by society, culture, friends, whatever it was. Not all my friends, but some of my friends. And it made me want to just really understand, how could that paradox exist, that I feel more me, and yet the people who love me and anyone who maybe would take the time to listen to my story would be like, wow, that's really, you chose yourself, and in choosing yourself, you're actually choosing them in a different way.
Yeah.
But I started to see how terrified people were of relationship endings, that they wanted to like shame me for the fact that I left. I was afraid of commitment, what was wrong with me. I had everything that was good on paper. And so it really created this insatiable desire, one, to feel like, well, if that exists when I leave and I found the courage to do it, then how many people stay because of that fear? Because that was a fear I had before I left, but then it was realized, and then you confront it and you feel how liberated you feel in the face of, let's say, shame. And so it just became a deep, like, I wanted to fight for the people who thought they were broken because their relationship ended, because I felt that way in some sense, but yet I felt alive. So it was this strange juxtaposition. And then I've just noticed that to be true, is like I seem to have this core soul based, maybe it's karmic, like when there's injustice or when there's a lack of fairness, I will advocate for that. And I had a numerology astrology thing done recently, and the woman told me that I had two karmic numbers. And she said that most people have one, and some people have, I think, four is the most. And some have none. And she said, none is boring, but you've got two. And one of them was that at some point in a previous life, if you believe in this, great. If you don't, great. I had exploited power.
Mm.
And maybe, she gave an example. She said, like, maybe you enslaved millions of people. And she said, you used power. And she said, so now in this lifetime, she said, it could be your fourth or fifth since then, who knows? But you then have to empower millions of people, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Like, it does feel like I can't not, like, I'll
Yeah.
burn everything down if
Yeah.
I have to, which is a
Yeah. Yeah.
strange paradox. Cause I'm like, well, that's not very strategic.
No, it's definitely not strategic if we're going to look at just the business savvy things. I mean, I've seen you over the years make some decisions that most people would be terrified to death to make. You've built this, Create the Love has reached millions and millions of people. And I think I'm not sure if it was in 2024 and 2020 or 2023. I saw you decided to step away from the Instagram at the very least for a certain amount of time. And I'm well, instead of assuming, I'm going to ask you, what did it feel like to go through that, and were the responses of people watching you basically reclaim? I see a lot of this trait in the ways you show up, basically, and I want to have your feedback. There is a willingness to keep the things that have power over us in check. It's like a certain relationship with authority and things that have power over us, or things that we allow to dominate us, whether it's social media, whether it's within a relationship, whether it's any externalized figure of authority. And yeah, I just want to have your input on that.
I really love the way that you systemize or deconstruct what you observe. I mean, I noticed that in your writing, but it's so great to be in conversation with you and experience that.
Thank you.
Because I've for a long time followed your writing too. I mean, you're like one of the OGs on Substack. So it's really
Thank
great
you.
to just see how much success you've had with it. There with Instagram, it sort of started with the engagement ending, and then that desire of like, oh, this system of relationship is keeping us powerless. Like we're staying in relationships that are unhealthy, and that's considered great because we stayed together. And I was like, wait, like, why are we celebrating anniversaries and not depth? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so with the conversation with Instagram, what I just noticed is I had a lot of anxiety in relationship to it. And then I had a feeling that I needed to leave, but then my business was reliant on it. So then I started to see the similar structures of relationship where one person makes money and the other person doesn't. And then what happens is they don't feel safe to express themselves, because Harriet Lerner has this great line where she says that if you're not free to leave a relationship, you'll never feel free to be yourself in a relationship. So if I depend on you to pay for everything, but me speaking up means you might leave me, then I won't speak up because I lose safety. And so I just started to see how social media was, probably unconsciously, but then consciously, in my opinion, recognizing that all these people were really reliant on it as a form of business and reach. And so what they would do is say, well, if you don't do these things that we want you to do, which is short form content, you have to post every day. Sometimes you got to post twice a day. If you don't keep your stories going, then you're going to lose relevance. And so when I left, I didn't know why I needed to leave, but now it all makes sense, because there was this, if I'm willing to leave it, then I can choose to be with it.
Yes.
So I experienced sovereignty in relationship to it. So I know I can survive without it. And then I went, okay, well, I started to experience this almost like I was in a relationship with an abuser.
Yeah.
Because nothing was ever enough. If I said the wrong thing, I could lose everything.
Yes.
If I didn't do what they wanted, I could lose everything or just become irrelevant. They'd make me be erased. Like I would just not have a voice. No one would see anything. And that it'll always be a mystery how the algorithm works. So if you think about it, it's like the exact dynamic of an abuser. And I interviewed Stephen Porges about this, who's the founder of polyvagal theory. And I said to him, like, why do I feel anxious in relationship to this thing? And he said, Mark, never before in history has the nervous system had a version of you that exists separate of you. So when you're sleeping, we used to normally restore our systems. When you went for dinner with, for you, your wife, for me, my wife, we go for dinner with our wives, our kids. If our phone's in our pocket, there's a part of our nervous system and our unconscious mind that is saying, am I safe? Am I still safe out there? Before, you didn't do that. You had dinner. And if you and I gave this podcast live in person in front of a tribe, when we went to bed, we were safe. We'd have to deal with the social consequences in person, but we got the time to rest. And I started to see that the anxiety I was witnessing in so many people, including myself, was that I was still like, my nervous system was still surveying for cancel culture, for social risk. And so while I was processing all that, I mean, there's one other layer that I really saw with this, was that I was taking care of my in-laws' horses, and I was feeding them. And I'm not a horse person, but I was voluntold that I would take this on.
Yeah.
So I decide that I'm going to change the order in how I feed these horses, because I put them in the pasture, then I feed them. And I was like, I'll just put the food out and then feed them. But
Yeah.
when I put the food out, I'm not a horse person. So I like look over and they're jumping around in their stalls. I'm not qualified for this. Anyways, I end up bringing them into the pasture. They're doing jump buck kicks and stuff. My nervous system was so dysregulated by the time I got them in there. And I went home and I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I wonder, because I was fasting too. And I was like, I wonder where my blood is at, like my sugars, because
Yeah.
for sure I dumped a ton of sugar in my blood because I was scared. And when I get home, I check it because my phone was at home and it was at 140, like an hour and a half later, which is really elevated
Yeah.
for me, especially. And so I'm like, wow. And I remembered wearing a CGM when I got some sort of DM that was like rude and a lot of things. And I got those all the time. I mean, I don't get them as much, but I used to get them a lot when I was more outspoken about stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
And what happened, I started to think like the body doesn't physiologically know the difference between a notification and a real life issue. Because when I got that notification, my blood glucose skyrocketed,
Yeah.
preparing me for safety to move, mobilize, fight, whatever it was. And I started to think to myself, I wonder if social media left unmanaged, and if we don't have these awarenesses that I'm talking about, actually becomes a way that we develop over time metabolic disorders and insulin resistance. Not to mention the impact of blue light on melatonin, which is a precursor for so many hormones, and dopamine and all the things. So I started to just see how all of these things were so layered and how we're resistant to really knowing it. Because if you're in a relationship with someone who's not good to you or weaponizes provision, let's say providing, you often won't want to know that because then you recognize your own self-abandonment in relationship to that. And that's painful. You recognize that you're depending on this person and now you don't have access to your voice. Maybe you inherited that behavior. If you're the person weaponizing provision, you feel that too. And it was really very much an act of deep trust to leave because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, am I going to survive? And of course, it did have an impact on my business. It had an impact on my podcast. It had a lot of impacts. Um, but I feel so grateful for the things that I learned in that time. But speaking to what you said about power structures, yeah, I felt very much like all these creators and teachers and everyone has so much anxiety in relationship to these things, and they need to learn how to liberate themselves. And I see that same structure with food, with pharma, with all of it, right? Because it's all the same. Like if I feed you processed foods and shit, you're going to need these drugs. If I make you dependent on the drug, then you can never leave me. If I make you dependent on social media, you can never leave it. And it's almost like on a lot of levels, like we talk about this idea of the singularity where man merges with technology. And I'm like, well, I just don't think our nervous system has evolved as fast as technology has. And now we're, on the edge of AI, which I think is going to be really fascinating. And I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on that. We should probably get into that too.
Yeah. There's a trait that you reclaim there. First, in leaving that previous relationship in your late 20s, but also in leaving this social media relationship. It's almost like a suicide bomber to a certain degree. It's like, I'm willing to put my life on the line type thing instead of losing myself in this thing. And I've
Mm,
sometimes wondered, what does it look like for somebody to really develop that trait? Because so many people are in relationships where they are dealing with the similar dynamics, and maybe they're afraid to confess the truth to themselves and to see the truth. But I think beyond everything, they are afraid of like the cost of leaving or the cost of like naming the unpopular truth. So there is I wonder how to name that trait. It's like I am willing to burn it all down to the ground instead of losing myself in there.
mm.
So if somebody is trapped in a dynamics like that, how can they even begin? Oh, I don't know if you have some thoughts on how they can begin to cultivate that.
Yeah, well, I think the first part is telling the truth about it, because if you don't acknowledge that you are the active participant in any pattern, then you can't change it. If you want to be the victim of all your, because it's true, you could wake up in a relationship and be like, oh my gosh, I'm like a victim of these power dynamics. And that's true. And you're still choosing to participate in them, even if it's an adaptive strategy that comes from a beautiful place. Like, I remember when I was talking about people pleasing as an adaptive strategy, and I said that it's actually deeply manipulative, and the response I often got was, yeah, but it's fawning and it's an adaptive strategy, and like, where's the compassion for where it comes from? And I said, just because we recognize the manipulative nature of people pleasing doesn't mean there's not compassion. It's not a binary.
Yeah.
And we live in such this world that everything is a fucking binary, pardon my language, but
No
we live in
worries.
this world where everything's a binary,
Yeah.
and it's not. It's so complex. So I think if you're in a pattern, you want to change it, you wake up within it, you have to tell the truth about it, but you also have to own the part of you that is benefiting on some level. It doesn't matter what it is, for staying in the pattern.
Yes.
And so the beautiful thing that creates it from an unconscious place can become a beautiful thing that's conscious, that allows you to be liberated from it. And here's the thing, is if you don't change a pattern that you're aware of, it will change you. It will demolish you physiologically. Like, the cost of unrealized potential and unlived truths is that you will pay for it in your body. You'll pay for it in your anxiety, your mind. You'll start to get fractured in here because you can't be with reality. So you have to go
Yes.
to banana land. And I say that with
Yeah.
love, but I noticed myself starting to go a bit crazy, like stir crazy, because I wasn't acknowledging this soul's call for something. And what I've just realized when I left that engagement is that there is this deep level that isn't required. Life requires you to trust it on some level. The mystery requires you to trust it. I was listening to the book Awareness by Anthony DeMello recently, and he said faith is insecurity. And I thought, that's so, yeah. Faith is what you choose in the face of insecurity, which is isn't that like such the micro of the believing in something that you can never name, and the believing of the journey that can never be labeled? And I wrote this not that long ago, where I said, when you don't live a truth, you trade a truth you need.
Hmm.
So when you know something that you need to put into your life that you're not doing, but you want to know something else, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, will never give it to you, because you've said that when you give me the grace of this information or knowing, I don't believe you. I don't trust you. So I want something else, though. And whatever is our belief goes, you're not getting anything else. Like, you don't even trust what I say already. And so I think if you're in those systems, it's like everything in nature is designed for you to become more well and to become more expanded. Like, that's true of everything we see. Even cancer is the attempt at that, which is wild, right? So I also think about physiologically that when you're at war with your own intuition, what happens is physiologically you experience that war. So, you get autoimmune, you get gut issues, you get so many things that, I mean, I'm not making that up. You could look at the adverse childhood experiences study. The more cumulative trauma you've had, the more likely you are to have autoimmune. And so it's just like this war with ourselves, which, don't get me wrong, it's like we're trying to prevent conflict outside of us. But whenever you try to prevent conflict outside of you, it's not free. It lives inside of you. And I think when you just recognize the physiological cost of staying small, nothing's free. So there's a price. And it's like, are you willing to pay the price? And some people say yes. I'm just not, because what happens when you create that gap where you're not listening to something is then you need something to numb that feeling. So then you need drugs, then you need codependency, you need hooks, you need casual sex, you need all these things. And I'm like, when you constantly try to align yourself with truth, which is an ongoing thing, because you're always going to learn more and you're always going to have more truth revealed to you through other people. that's actually not evidence that something's wrong with you, that you have more to learn. It's evidence that you're growing, that you're paying attention. I hope that makes sense. That was a
Oh, I
long
love
answer.
that so much. Love that so much. And you shared something. You said, "Are you willing to pay the price?" There's a dysfunctional price that we pay through staying in a relationship or staying in a dynamic that's not really supportive of our expansion. And you know, it's like, which price do you really choose to pay?
Mm,
Paying the price of truth is going to come with a whole bunch of disillusionments. It's going to come with, sometimes the realization that I've made speaking truth and standing for truth way more gloomy than it actually is. And yes, there's a price to pay there. It's like the question is, what price do you really choose to pay? Um, and from what I'm hearing from you is you choose to pay the price of. I mean, truth comes with a price. Everybody knows that already, but that's the price you choose to pay. And the life that's on the other side is really what you want to reclaim there. And when you were speaking, I've been following your journey for a while. I've been following even um, you know, your journey with your wife Kylie, and how you had a moment. I think you had a rift at some point in time, and I wonder what was the journey of truth that led to the repair and now to building a family, and now to having a child together, and what else you're going to build together. I just wonder what was the journey in between, when the fracture happened, and your your own invitation to step, or maybe for both of you to step into deeper truth together.
yeah, I mean, it was and continues to be a really profound experience, rich with so much learning. Oh my gosh, like
Mm.
so much learning. I So in our relationship 1.0, as we call it, I was very much like, I want to get married by this age. I want to have kids, but I knew what I wanted. It wasn't like I was following society's script. At this point, I was like, I think I was 37 when I met her at 36. So there was a knowing. I knew what I wanted to create. And there was a knowing for her, but she had a bit more ambivalence. She had been divorced and she was processing that. And there was still some residue. I didn't know about the Saturn return, but I happened to be lucky enough to start dating her right as she was entering hers, which that's a whole, right? It's like I left mine, she's in hers. I'm like, fuck, hold on. And what was really the model, which needed to still be resolved in me and needed to be resolved in her, because of course it's all perfect, is this recognition that I was ready for all these things. I said I was. And then I met this woman who wasn't necessarily ready for all those things, but I was very clear about the timelines.
Yeah.
And she was good with that. But then as we got closer to the timelines, she started to shift the one about kids. And I was like, okay, well, I checked in with myself. Can I shift it another year or so? And I was like, okay. But then and what was going on in our relationship at this time is I'm ready for all this. She's a bit uncertain. And so, how do we resolve her uncertainty?
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I had said my previous pattern was that I had been in relationship with unavailable people. Like my wound would have been, I don't feel fully chosen. But yet here I find myself with someone who's like 97% in. But I realized that 3% still feels like 100% not in. Like to the nervous system, it's so important that the people who are chasing unavailable people, and you have someone who's almost available, they're not available, like to what you want to create. And this was all by design because I needed to learn how to stand in, why am I all in on someone who's not all in? Like that, like that doesn't make sense. Where did I learn that? And what was really interesting too is I would have said that her ambivalence was something that needed to be resolved. Like, what's wrong with her? Like, what happened in her childhood? What's going on in her divorce, right? But what actually changed everything was two things. One, when we realized that maybe the right choice was to end the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So when we actually turned towards that, because we tried everything else, that's when all of a sudden there was light, because we weren't turning towards her ambivalence from a place of what's wrong with her, that she can't choose me. And that just perpetuated my wounds. And I got to blame her. That was great. And it became, what's right with her that she's uncertain. And so we just honored the uncertainty and ended the relationship. And the way we ended the relationship was something I'd never done before. We did a closing ceremony.
Mm.
And I mean, that was profound. It was like one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I sent her, the way we ended our relationship, like the very closing conversation, I had to be out of town for work, and then we were FaceTiming, and the conversation was beautiful, but we hadn't actually like come together in person and really had a hard, cry about it, and really a loving goodbye, because there was so much love there. And so I sent her like, what would a closing ceremony look like? I like Googled it, and I was like, oh shit, other crazy people have done this too. So I sent it to her, and we agree upon the questions we're going to process. And when I go to the house to go do it, there was a few things that we did. We like lit a fire, and then we used a birdhouse was a metaphor of a dream that she had. And she had this dream very early in our relationship. And it was that there was a burning house, and the house was our relationship, and she had to leave it.
Mm.
And she didn't want to leave it. And so she was angry about having to leave something she didn't want to leave. So she said, you know what? Like God or whoever gave me this dream, no, I have sovereign choice. I'm going to choose. And of course, God's like, good luck. We'll see how that feels. And it didn't feel good, because that's where she started to get sick before the ending of our relationship. Her stomach was always upset. She was experiencing different symptoms of like candida, etc. So when we burn that, we create a playlist of songs that matter to both of us. And so before I get in the house, though, I'm sitting out in the car and I'm thinking, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And I sit there and I'm like, do I not want to do this because I don't genuinely want to do this? Or do I not want to do this because the person who can do this doesn't exist yet?
Mm.
Like I'm afraid of what I'm about to confront because of what it's going to demand from me.
Yeah.
And wow, man, the answer was yes to the second one. So I walk in because I'm like, well, if that's the answer, like, let's go. The questions were, what was our favorite memory and why? And that was, I mean, God, that was like so hard. And then what did I appreciate about the other person and why? Like, what did we appreciate about each other? And the third one was, what did we hope for the other person? And that was actually pretty hard to access, because, of course, you're like in this beautiful ending, but you're like, I hope you find your person. It wasn't genuine. And so we acknowledged that. But what I experienced in that moment that I didn't realize would be so transcendent to us coming back together and profound for both of us is that in the ending, more love existed.
Yeah.
And I started to see, like, one time a podcast guest said to me that you should prepare your relationship when it ends as you would a house for the new owner.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, like I've never thought like that, like to actually bring grace and closure and love and appreciation in the face of heartbreak and endings and deaths,
Yeah.
But it changed everything in both of us. Like all of a sudden there was like a DNA change, like it was subatomic. It was this change of like, oh, wow, I can love all out, and love can be more present if that container of it changes or ends, or the type of relationship. And then that makes you so much more confident about love, because then you're like, well, we could choose to be in a relationship together. And if that relationship ended, that wouldn't be the decimation of either of us. It wouldn't be what I experienced in the ending of my engagement and previous relationships, where I'd ended them and been like, oh, I don't like you anymore, or I'm upset with you, or like it just felt so immature now in hindsight how I'd behaved in previous endings. So that rupture then looked like no contact. We didn't communicate. We came back together like 4 months later. We both acknowledged and feel aligned. And then both went on our separate ways. And then, I was very clear that I was never going to go back.
Yeah.
In that, like, I would never go try to convince her ever to be in a relationship with me ever again. I was so clear on that. And my body needed to know that. Like, I will never leave my center ever for love again.
Mm-hmm.
And then she also was like, I will never be in a relationship that requires me to feel like I'm broken. I'll always honor what's true. And so she sent me a message and was like, hey, I'd love to grab a coffee. And we did. And she was like, I'm ready to have kids and I'm ready to choose this. And I was like, whoa, what?
What did that feel like to have somebody disconfirming the story that I am the unchosen one?
I mean, it was this strange, like we've talked about everything, this strange both and, because it was everything I ever wanted to hear.
Yes.
But also at the same time, it was like, who was I without it, without
Yeah.
the wound? Who was I
Yes.
without the desperation or the need? And I'd been living this level of certainty in myself that I chose me. And that really, it was like what I always longed for from her was what I really needed to do for myself. And so to have both myself choosing myself and someone say that to me, yeah, it felt like a really beautiful
Yeah.
coming home on some level.
That question that you mentioned, who am I without the wound? I wonder if that's a question that most people have asked themselves. It's like we fantasize about, you know, being done with the pain and being done with suffering. And I don't think we often ask ourselves the questions like, what would it look like to really take action from a place where the wound is not calling the
Mm.
shots? Because in the moment where you said you had that clear line, I will no longer, you know, chase a relationship where it feels like I have to be outside of my core. It's like taking a stand and choosing to act from the part of you that is not operating from the wound. And that was a clear delineation right there. So yeah, I just wanted to amplify that part because in case it could support somebody out there. Um, but that ceremony you talked about, the closure ceremony, there's a part of me that can't help but think, what if it could be something that at some point in time a couple does, just like you prepare your house to sell the house, and then after you clean the whole house, I don't know, you bought some new furniture, and then you're like, no, I love this house, I'm not selling,
Yeah.
type thing. So part of me can't help but thinking, to a certain degree, it was necessary to renew the vows in this specific relationship that you
Mm.
had together. Would you say it, even though you didn't think you were coming back together, but would you say that it played the role of creating space for, I mean, in a sense, you became the new owner,
Mm.
you know?
In the
Would
same
you say,
house. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It makes me think of that line from Esther Perel where she says that get divorced, but stay together,
yeah,
and that really is what led us to write our book, because we realized that we had discovered something like this profound
yes,
medicine, and we had discovered that you maybe didn't have to break up, that you
yeah,
could actually just go through the processes that we experienced in a container of safety. And really, because if you think about it, most relationships are not dedicated to telling the truth, and that's okay. That's because most, as you said, it's like most of our relationships we unconsciously are seeking anyways to resolve, operating from the wound, as you were elaborating on. So it's like if most relationships operate from a wound, then in service of the relationship moving to another level, which is where I see so many couples, they hit the upper level of their connection because they have to let the old part of them die. And if we create something like a ceremony to facilitate that, then what we encourage is that people talk about what created, why they are the way they are, why the relationship is the way it is, that you both individually explore what is yours. And then how does each of your stuff contribute to the collective stuff? And if you can use the collective stuff, instead of seeing it as a problem with the relationship, you see it as an opportunity for evolution. And so now it says, okay, well, actually, our stuff that we say is bad is actually material. So now we can use it. So what happens if we have a ceremony where we basically, kill the old versions of us, or have a wake or a generous ceremony or celebration of life or death, and we actually structure that, and then we say, okay, well, from today forward, we're moving through a threshold of a new way. What would a new way look and feel like? Because Stan Tatkin's work, he's a famous psychotherapist, he talks about how the reason that relationships end is because people fail to create clear agreements at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but like, I was never taught about creating agreements. You heard vows, but you'd hear like these standard vows. You didn't realize like how sacred those promises are and how sacred those agreements are. And what does it mean to say we're going to use the material of our relationship to become free? And I mean, man, yeah. So I think any couple can decide that. And I think what's important when they're doing the sort of evaluation period after, which we call in our book the sacred pause, is that actually the evaluation is us being a couple in the highest service of love,
Yes.
or as being friends, or as being co-parents, or as being, and if you can actually just be with that possibility. Like, I was working with a couple going through that sacred pause recently, and there was this real desire for one of them to have certainty. Like, yeah, but it has to be romantic. Like, it has to. And I said, it can have to for you, but also allow that it might not be. And if you could just allow the possibility, then you're free to choose romance. If it has to be it because you're so terrified of what lives on the other side of that, you can't be with the truth of what the relationship is trying to be, because you're still trying to force it. And of course, that's so natural for us, right? Like, I mean, that's like the story of my young life.
Yeah. And it touches a little bit the point you had prior with regards to faith. And it feels like it's so central to a relationship because you realize, you have to realize so many times that I cannot control how this
Yeah.
person will choose to love me. Like, I have absolutely zero control over if this person will want to meet my needs, will care about my needs, will want to engage in a way that feels safe to me at the like, I literally have no control. And uh, how much trust? I just want to speak to the topic of trust in there, and how that has to coexist with the uncertainty that cannot really be taken away, because even vows do not guarantee that somebody will show up the way you want them to show up. So let's say somebody is strongly anxious, in their patterns, and doesn't know how to stand in that space of uncertainty. How can they begin to bridge the gap?
Mm. I mean, the first thing is, for someone who's prone to more anxiety or anxious attachment style, there is a leaving of your own center. I mean,
Yes.
that's at the core of it. Is, I'm going to go create safety outside of me, and that will create safety inside of me. So this balance of, how do I trust that this other person is going to show up, have the conversations we need? Well, the first part is we need to be really explicit about what does it mean to show up.
Yeah.
Like, what are the agreements that we are going to base our relationship upon? How are we going to handle conflict? How are we going to handle difference? How are we going to handle when one person has to make a compromise?
Yeah.
And how do we honor what they're losing for the relationship to gain something, right? Like, that's this balance between sacrifice and self-abandonment. Sacrifice is in service of the connection. Abandonment means that it's not at all in service of yourself. And so there's this really beautiful balance that we need to find, which is, I trust you, but not in the absence of trusting myself. If me pretending I trust you means I can't trust me, like if I'm going to trust you and us to work through an infidelity, but yet you keep demonstrating to me that you have the old behavior, when I say I'm going to trust, I now have completely left myself. So there is a place where we're actually leaving our center. The interesting thing about the other person in that dynamic is this person, everything is about them, right? So they're the person who has to resolve something. They're the person who keeps capturing the psychic energy or the vital life force of the other person. But the person who's giving the life force has to recognize they're giving it. They have to recognize they're the ones who are leaving their own center, and they probably had to learn that at a really young age. The other person can only take responsibility for actually starting to uh, have humility, show up for their own behaviors, etc. But the actual way that they change, if they do, because this is true if you think about this dynamic, it's like an addict, a narcissist, an abuser, a, um, someone who chronically cheats, all that kind of stuff is like the only way they ever get sober from the behavior is when the other person finally says no more, because for this person, that's the resolution of the wound. And so this great act of trust has to come from a grounded place, and wounds are not grounded. Wounds are frenetic. So you're operating from a wound when it feels frenetic. And what it does too, which is really fascinating when I work with couples, is that when the person who is prone to self-abandonment, people pleasing, placating, all that kind of stuff, for a good reason, is in a relationship with someone who is more avoidant, more distancer, they have an established self which has walls. This other person has an amorphous self. It bleeds everywhere, and it probably feels like it bleeds. And they are kind of absorbed all around this other person. When this person finally says a radical truth, like a rant, from a body, like anger, justice, this other person's system goes, there you are. I can't trust you when you're being manipulative. I can't trust you. Now, again, we're not blaming the more anxious person. I'm just saying, like, you could try to get this person to change all day, but if you really want your future relationships to feel mutual, you have to change first. Waiting for someone who's avoidant to change is, that you might as well just watch paint dry.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And when I was avoidant, I needed the electrocution of a truth.
Yes.
And even then, it didn't wake me up till years later. But what was really interesting is years later, that electrocution from a woman had planted a seed.
Yeah.
And years later, that seed bloomed amongst a bunch of other feedback from women where it was like, you're unavailable. It's always on your terms. It's, you get to decide the depth of intimacy, all that kind of stuff. And I did it with good language. I knew how to speak to the gray areas of the human psyche. It was so fascinating to finally take responsibility for that. But that truth was only awakened by someone willing to lose us.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, well, you're willing to tell me that. I'm kind of okay with losing us because I'm kind of unavailable anyway. So thanks. You kind of relieve me. And then, but what was happening deep below was this. She had told me that I was known for saying I wanted a relationship, but never being available to one.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, right. But when she said it to me, years later, I remember being like, I remember when she said that.
Yeah.
I am known for that. Okay, why am I known for that? Oh, because my behaviors teach people that. So there's a mismatch between what I say and who I am. And what I noticed was that people were falling in love with the idea of how I behaved, not what I said.
Yeah.
And that's why when people say, always believe someone's actions over words, I'm like, never. Whenever there's a mismatch, red flag.
Yes.
And it's because I've been a red flag, so I can recognize,
Yeah.
where it exists.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say as well, it would be, to everybody in a relationship right now that has some challenges. I mean, all relationships have their challenges, but it's to work on seeing what is keeping them from reconciling what they say they want and what their actions are demonstrating. Like to really work on on seeing what's in there, like what's in the middle, what is there's a broken circuit there that needs to be reconnected, and why won't it reconnect? I see that as so potent. And I there are so many angles that I want to get into, but I'm also aware of the time we're working with today. And if you have space for that, I would love
I do.
to.
Yeah, I got space.
Okay. So what are we playing with in
I
terms of
got,
space?
let me just check. I know I have. Let me just look. I have till 12:15. Let's say 12:10, just because I'll probably have to.
Okay.
12:15 will be fine.
Well, I'm in Newfoundland right now, so how so our
I'm in
time zones
Mountain
are.
Time. Sorry, my bad.
No
So,
worries.
sorry, I have till 1:15. So you're EST, right?
Yeah. Just how
Yeah.
many
So I
how
have
many
till
minutes?
I have 30 minutes.
30 minutes? Okay,
Yeah,
fantastic.
that was easier.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll get my editor to just crop this
Yeah, all good.
section right there. But one thing I want to. Oh, you know what? That's a note that I'm going to leave out here just for people tuning into this podcast. I will ask the editor, not to edit this because life is unedited. So, I'm just going to leave it like that.
I love it.
There are so many creatives that are listening, sometimes tuning into my work, and we have this addiction to perfectionism, and yeah, that's it. This is human
Yeah, I
life,
agree.
and the title of your Substack is humaning, and this is us humaning at the moment. So I'm just gonna leave it like that.
I love it.
um yeah, there's something that you mentioned there that I find I I I can't really emphasize how potent it is in the journey of creating harmony in relationships, in the journey of creating even more. Basically, I'm here sitting thinking about all the different ways I can amplify what you just mentioned there because it's so brilliant. It's like, what is my willingness to operate from a place where there is way more congruence between what I say I want and what my actions are showing? And in my own ways, sometimes I would say I desire more connection, and I'll speak that. And sometimes when I get frustrated by a specific thing, you know, frustrated to a certain degree, and instead of not taking instead of addressing it sometimes with more, sometimes it could take less long for me to address some things, and it will take me longer than it needs to. And in the
Hmm.
moment I am aware, part of me is like, I mean, this kind of work, what's going on here, that in this moment you are not in service of connection, that to a certain degree you're a little bit shut down,
Yeah.
and you even know what it would take to go address what is causing the shutdown right now, but you're choosing not to address it because, So I've
Been
found
there.
it
Been there.
fascinating within myself to sometimes see, okay, in this moment, I say I deep down want connection, but there's a part of me that does not want connection
Yeah.
that has hijacked me. Um, so there's almost like the work to take ourselves out of a possession, like I
Mm.
am being possessed by something in this
Mm.
moment. And even admitting that,
So well said.
Um, so yeah, I think recently what I've had to do is I, would have a conflict with my wife, and I'll just go look at her. I'm like, I know I want to resolve this thing, but there's also I am possessed by right now by the part of me that just wants you to fuck right off,
Yeah, totally.
and sometimes just naming that has been the bridge. And I wonder if you have
Mm,
your own ways to just take ourselves out of our own patterns, like disrupting that
mm.
glitch and glitch that for to a certain degree. Yeah, anything you have that goes in that direction would be potent in this moment.
Well, first, thanks for naming what I think everyone experiences, and you said it so eloquently with this feeling of possession, because a wound is possessive. It, we could feel like when we get dysregulated, let's say we're someone who's prone to defensiveness, and our partner, even if they have the most perfect language,
Yeah,
we still, because we have such delicate self worth if we're defensive.
yeah,
But let's be honest, most people pair with someone whose language is highly critical. So what happens is that the wound is a radar. And so the wound says, when I've heard something like this and or felt something like this, it's been dangerous to connection and maybe physically. So I'm going to just take over an automation and go into a behavior that I believe is going to protect us, even though it often maintains the wound, right? It just feeds it. So if I'm afraid that if you criticize me, I'm not enough, and then you might leave me, so I get really reactive, and then you leave me because I'm so reactive. So it ends up feeding the same loop. So recognizing the possessive nature of the wound is so important, because I think it's like, although I don't agree with this about AA, the very first part of AA is saying I have to surrender to my disease, which I really think the first part of any sort of healing is a surrender. But I also think when you name something like defensiveness as being like a flaw within you, then it's not resolvable. It's like my alcoholism is genetic. And it's like, no, but alcohol didn't exist way back in the day. So at some point, that's not true. And also, the behaviors that facilitate the use of alcohol to numb is what you inherited. And so you needed an adaptive strategy. That could become marijuana today. That could become so many things. It could become social media. And so, of course, there's like the harm reduction, but are you ever free? If you can never be sober, then you're never free. And so if you can never leave Instagram, you can never put your phone down, you're not free. You're enslaved by it. And so this same idea of I want connection, and yet I feel this yearning. I think you have to find something that matters more than your old pattern.
yeah,
So you have to find something that has a deeper meaning to you. Like for me, my work is my accountability. So I don't teach things I don't know. They're embodied. Sometimes they're not perfected, that's for sure. Like my wife and I have similar tiffs like you and your wife, because conflict is not a demonstration of a problem. It's relationship working itself out in real time. And it's, are we going to say yes to the material that's being invited to work out? One of my favorite quotes from John and Julie Gottman is that relationship masters, they call them masters and disasters,
mm,
which I love that they don't mess around with the wording. They're like, you're
yeah,
going to feel it. If you're a disaster, you're a fucking disaster. So deal with it. And we're not afraid of the appropriate level of shame that
yeah,
comes with awareness of a behavior that is destructive. I'm
yeah,
not saving people from the shame of awareness. Fuck that. It's like, if you're violating your own morality, you have to feel the pain of that, because
yeah,
if I don't mirror to you what you already know, then I'm participating in your own dysfunction. I'm afraid that you're going to feel something. So I'm playing out as an interventionist, the codependency. I'm just participating in the same shit.
yeah,
So the more I can unlayer that myself, the more this comes from an integrated place. So my commitment is to that. I won't work with someone in a place that I don't have awareness or can't offer some support, but I have to reflect to them their power. Like, you do this. Okay, well, let's not fuck around and pretend you don't, because the freedom is you knowing it. I was working with a woman the other day, who's in a relationship, not physically, but emotionally with someone who's married. And she, they've sexted. And she was like, yeah, like I'm upset with him. And like the way he gets to just decide our connection. I'm like, you're deciding your connection. But at the core of this connection, you're in complete violation of your own integrity. Like you're saying he's cheating on his wife emotionally or text wise, but you're actually cheating on yourself. And you're the object of someone else's lack of integrity. So that means you don't. So it just becomes like if we can just name it. And when we named it, she grieved because she got to feel the truth of violation of her own being.
Yeah.
And that's sacred. That's a sacred act to be with this suffering. And then to be like, I always think of the language of like alchemy. It's like, let it cook you.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite lines from Francis Weller is that alchemy doesn't care about the alchemist. Like the process of evolution doesn't care about your feelings. So it's going to deliver to you what you need. And the quote from the Gottmans is, we never, when my partner is upset, the world stops and I listen. We repair, we repair, we repair. So I think when you bring forward something like the possession, you out the shadow.
Yeah.
You out the wound. And then the wound says, oh my gosh, you've exposed me. But the wound then says, you've exposed me. And then the other person could say, thank you for bringing that forward. Like, I get that there's a part of you right now, if I hear you correctly, that you don't want to be here. You want me to F right off. And then, but there's another part of you that wants connection. I want to honor both those parts. How do I make the part that wants to tell me to F off get at ease? Oh, man. Well, if you take ownership for the way that you spoke, that would really be helpful for him to feel calmer, seen, witnessed, his anger, that it didn't feel okay. And what that does is it allows our nervous system to recognize that we're actually in a place, because what's going on is co-regulation. But I get that, man. Like I had a thing with my wife the other day where after the fight, which was so ridiculous, I got reactive about the way she said something. And of course, we have kids. You have kids too. So we have a just over 2-year-old. So, like, there's often a lot of exhaustion present. And so emotional regulation is not quite as good.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought I was a great communicator before I had a kid. But yeah, we just had this beautiful moment where I was like, I'm really sorry for how I spoke to you there.
Yeah.
And knowing that, like, if I was seeking perfection, then that would bring forward shame as a teacher. But instead, what I'm seeking is progress, which is a great line from AA. It's about progress, not perfection. And so it's like this, every time that we do this dance and we repair, there's more deposits put into our connection that say ruptures are not danger, they're connection. Ruptures are not, and so there's a safety that's created, which I mean, I wish I knew that when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, go all the way to 40.
Yeah.
And I'm only really realizing the value of it. And I really think about that even in the context of all the ideological battles that people have about politics and gender and vaccines, all these things.
Yeah.
That there's actually a skill set that has to be developed to sit with difference and recognize wisdom in difference.
Yes.
Even difference that feels based on hate. It's not to say that we should give space or a platform, quote unquote, because that's what everyone says.
Yeah.
It's just that we can finally be like, I'm going to stop fighting this thing from a place of dysregulation. I think what's really interesting, when one of my first coaches said to me, when I was advocating for something, I was up in arms about something. I can't remember what it was, but she said to me that the more you resist that, the more you reinforce it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh God. And isn't that so true of conflict?
I mean, it's so true. It's, one thing you mentioned there that I find so potent is we've learned to look at conflict as the death of connection. And the more I lean into my own exploration, the more I realize conflict is a place where connection comes to be strengthened and
Mm,
reinforced and nurtured. And it's a place actually where disconnection comes to be exposed. And we operate in
that's
some
beautiful.
relationships from so many silent disconnects, like so many unspoken disconnects. And the more we become intimate, the more loud the disconnects become.
Mm,
And then conflict emerges and says, okay, I need you to address this disconnect and address this disconnect. And I'm not sure what your perspective is on it. I really feel like if there is such a thing as a conflict IQ, the collective conflict IQ, meaning our capacity to learn how to deal with that, is really, really. I mean, my conflict IQ is far from where I would love it to
same.
be.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes I get heated for things that looking back I'm like, geez, bro, you need a chill pill or something.
Yeah, I've been
But
there.
yeah, it feels like we only know repression to a certain degree. It's like, oh, if there's conflict out there, let me just tame it. Let me throw water onto it, or let me put a carpet on top of it. Um, how can how can people really begin to approach conflict with an open heart?
Mm. Well, I think it comes back to where we started in that you have to have access to your spine, because you won't trust yourself in conflict if you don't trust yourself to protect yourself in the face of conflict. And so knowing that we have access to our voice is such a profound thing, because if I'm going to walk into a conversation with you and I don't know me on some level, I don't have access to anger, because a lot of people avoid the emotion of anger because they associate anger with rage and destruction and aggression. But there's a such thing as clean anger, and clean anger stands in boundaries, protects values, protects worth, protects integrity. And it's necessary. There's a saying in the psychological space that anger is a secondary emotion, which
Yeah,
I don't agree with at all,
I'm not a
because
big fan of that.
yeah, and I see it perpetuated a lot by, relatively famous people. But I think the problem is that I feel like generally anger and grief end up being interchanged. So grief tends to be present where anger is not safe. And then anger tends to be present where we don't know how to feel grief or it's not safe. And so they tend to get interchanged. And if neither are safe, it shows up as anxiety, shame, guilt, and eventually depression. And so just like if we want to get access to being good at conflict, I mean, there's the skill set part of conflict, right? Like learning language, learning, like the Gottmans have the four horsemen of the apocalypse, they call them, and they're four behaviors that are present in all couples, but especially in couples that divorce. And they could listen to um, a large amount of time of a couple, I think it's 20 hours, and they can predict with over 93 or 94% accuracy if a couple will divorce. If they listen to just the first 3 minutes, they can predict with over 80% accuracy. So it tells you that the words we use are really important. And they have certain principles that they teach. The four horsemen are criticism. So it's statements starting with like, you always, you never. Defensiveness, which, we talked a bit about, shutting down, reacting. Contempt, which is things like rolling of the eyes, making a face of disgust. And that's really more hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
And actually, the greatest predictor of divorce is rolling of the eyes. And the last one is stonewalling, which is shutting down, withdrawing, hanging up the phone, leaving, ghosting, whatever it is. And so these tend to pair well together, but the antidotes to them are really beautiful. So the antidote to criticism is using I language, ownership language. When
Yeah.
that occurred, I felt.
Yeah.
So you're really starting to instead of you always, you never, which I catch myself, my wife's always, never, and I'm like,
Yeah.
shit, I got to get
Yeah.
back to
Absolute.
the structure of language. The second, for defensiveness, this one's really, I got to say, as someone who gets defensive, the antidote to this is saying, I can see some truth in what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It was like gross, but you end up feeling, what happens is you end up in conversations you've never been in before because you've hit the upper limit of your ability to manage conflict, and now you're going through it. And what you said about the deeper the intimacy, the more revelation of disconnection.
Yeah.
I love that. That's such a beautiful way of saying it, because what is always revealed in a trigger is an opportunity for mastery. And the reason it's an opportunity is because if you're willing to go into the trigger, then you're willing to learn a skill set that's required to walk past it. It doesn't mean the trigger is no longer sensitive, because that's what happens. People go, well, I thought I healed and then I got triggered and now I started over. It's like, no. What happens is instead of reacting, you choose to respond. And so you have a skill set that's required to walk by a wound. And that really is where I see the transcendence of a wound, is that you start to live from the wisdom of it. And then that completely changes your life. And so when you can move through these four horsemen and do the antidote to contempt is tougher. It's really trying to create eye to eye, but contempt is purposefully like this. In the research, resolving contempt is really hard. Like the use of a couples therapist or something like that isn't always productive. It doesn't, I mean, and based on what I've read, it doesn't really resolve much, because there's so much underlying hurt that has been stored over time. Like you said, throw a carpet on it. It's like, yeah, eventually it piles up, and you can't pretend it's not there. And then it shows up as this rolling of the eyes. And then the last one, stonewalling. I mean, ideally you stay longer, but you also have to create safety with the staying. And for the person who tends to withdraw, you're probably with someone who gets anxious when you withdraw. So you create a rule. Like, you can go take your time to process whatever you want to process. You're going to tell me when you're coming back. Can't be longer than 24 hours. And you're the one who has to come back. And that creates trust. And we have to have space for both people's experience in that. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing because at least it gives people a practical framework to start working with all of that. So I think it's great, and there is something about the de-armoring that is so necessary. When you talked about defensiveness and acknowledging the other person is almost de-armoring the heart to a certain degree. When we talk about contempt and it's like getting getting down from the safe pedestal that we build to to have contempt. It's like there's a humbling in there to a certain degree, which is I kind of stretch my heart to make room for what you are experiencing. And for some people it's going to be the exact opposite, especially the ones who are just completely porous, where
Yeah,
the experience is going to be, well, instead of be taking too much of what you're experiencing, I'm going to do the best I can to hold on to my spine.
yeah,
And
beautiful.
so I just love it. And my hope is that it gives some people a framework to begin to consciously engage conflict instead of just waiting that it goes away and that it disappears, or you know so I love that so much. There, I've been wanting to ask you something. I mean, we talked about artificial intelligence, and it feels like I'm gonna go in such a weird, different direction right now.
Do it,
So I'm
do it.
gonna own that. But here's something that I've seen over the last few months, maybe over the last year. It is the rise of artificial connection, and
Mm.
where I'm going with that is I received a message the other day from, from somebody I know, and I was just like, "Did you write this response with ChatGPT?" And he was like, "How did you know?" I was like, "Well, ChatGPT has a specific rhythm, and I also know I've known you for a while. I know the way you write." Um,
Mm.
so I'm wondering, what
That's
is this?
fascinating.
Maybe there's maybe this is just my brain being far-fetched, but I've just noticed on social, I've noticed even that was the first time it happened to me in a person. There's somebody I know, usually we text, and I feel like there's an emergence of people at the same time we crave depth, and we also show up in ways that are our actions demonstrate that we are willing to settle for artificial connection. It's like we have such deep longing for depth and intimacy and connection, and sometimes our actions demonstrate that we willing to settle for superficialities. And yeah. let me just throw all of this at you because I'm trying to formulate it myself right now. And I'm wondering what you're hearing and what is coming up and if you've noticed anything similar. And yeah, I've I feel like there's two major blocks forming collectively at the moment. People who long for deep rooted connected relationships and other people who are just like so burnt out that they settle for artificial connection.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a collective longing for community depth, circadian rhythm, you know. It's not a shock that the healing to so much of our dis-ease is getting sun in the morning and our bare feet on the ground. And there's something about that practice, waking up, and maybe it's ancestral, right? Because it's like what we'd always done. But it actually starts our biology and produces hormones, and it produces a lot of beautiful things that are necessary to function during the day. You know, I think the interesting thing about it is that we we are trying to resolve that longing with more digital connection.
Yeah.
Which I remember when Facebook first came out, I had a buddy, one of my best friends. We were like competing to get more friends on Facebook, you know,
Mm.
and he was always ahead of me. I guess I won now. But what's funny is that, I mean, I since deleted my personal Facebook because I just like could feel this, like it was where people were always getting in fights and lots of blah 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 blah. But I started to really feel, and this is so crazy to think about, but years ago I remember feeling this. I was looking at my iPhone. It was probably in like 2018 2017, and I remember looking at it, and it felt like it was pulling my energy out of my forehead. Now at the time I wouldn't have said third eye, I wouldn't have said, but I was just like, that's a weird feeling. I just remember thinking that. That's a weird feeling. That's weird that I'm making that up. Like, clearly it's not pulling anything out of my forehead. But I actually started to see like how it was planting the seeds for me, not just offloading consciousness or the dependence on thought, but also that it was like capturing my dopamine pathways. It was inhibiting my melatonin production. So I'm now like in this thing is part of my day. It is like integrated in my body in so many ways. I don't want it to be. So, okay. So I think there's this interesting thing that's occurring right now, which is we've never been more connected to more people than ever. But I would say we've never been more disconnected. And we've said that the solution to mental health challenges is more connection. They say, there's that saying, the opposite of addiction is connection. But it's not connection with superficiality and Instagram stories. And not saying there's not value to things, but it's this longing for this. And then the next level of this, which is you and I sitting in person, which we're geographically challenged with. But I mean, this is a beautiful alternative to that. And we wouldn't have discovered each other without technology. So this isn't about throwing out, you know, as they say, the baby with the bathwater. It's about saying, at what point does something good for you become something bad for you?
Yeah.
And I personally think that smartphones and social media is the smoking of today.
Yes.
And it's almost like I was reading a post from Jonathan Haidt about this.
Yeah. The author of The Anxious Generation.
Yeah, that book is so good, The Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
He said if you had one child with one device, and that was the only child, and we watched how they were using it, we would call that abuse. But because it's happening collectively, none of us want to acknowledge it. And I thought, wow, yes, like we don't want to acknowledge the very drug that we are all addicted to. And if we could just name it, then okay, now we realize that the anxiety we have, the mental health issues, I mean, even the ideological stuff that we go through is really just amplified by like buttons and algorithms. And actually, I forgot to say that one of the things that Stephen Porges said about the algorithm, he said that not only are you constantly, even if you have a private profile, being assessed by people for your value. You're actually a computer is determining the value of your words and your work.
Mm-hmm.
And so a non-human entity is deciding that. And I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. And how people are using AI to like write for them. Now I
Yes.
can understand the value of taking a video. Like I've taken a video where I did a long conversation by myself, uploaded it to Claude, and then said, Claude, write a blog post based on this writing. I got to tell you, the first time, and then I super edited it, but it created the structure.
Yeah.
But I've done that once. And then the second time I tried to do it, it was so bad. I was just like, did you even try? Like, that's what I was thinking. Did you even try? But I was listening to, maybe it was Rick Rubin. I can't remember. But they were saying that the first draft is the most important draft.
Yeah.
And so are we now subcontracting that? Like, at what point do we try to get something else to do all of the labor that is actually necessary for an organism to grow, right? Like, we all need what they call hermetic stress. So
Yeah.
we actually need stresses in our lives. That's why we cold plunge. That's why we do all these, we exercise. We do all these things because they stretch our organism. And I just wonder, is it all going to be like Wally? But I do think that we have two groups of people. One group is going to upload to the cloud. And maybe it's more poetic, but the other group is going to descend to the earth.
Mm.
And I don't think either is better, but I do think that the human physiology is designed for this one.
Yeah.
I don't think we're designed for the cloud. I just think this is empty and it's frenetic. You could feel it. It's the same thing as when you use social media and you've been on there for 30 minutes when you only meant to do 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And you can actually feel yourself not in control. And so you can feel that this video is funny or that conversation's cool or whatever. But at some point, also your body goes, there's something not real, much like how you felt about that text. There's something the body senses. It's so fascinating, like vibrationally, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely feel that, And when you were speaking, I feel like so many people are not realizing that it's, again, this is just a guess, that they might be going through a relational burnout because social media has put us in relationship with thousands of people more per day than we had ever
Yes.
been before. It's like every single day now you are in relationship with everybody everybody that you follow on social media. You see the content, you're aware of their thoughts, and maybe, I don't know, in a pre-internet era you were in relationship daily with probably 10, 15, 20 people you're interacting with at work,
Yeah.
your family. And that, I wonder if at some point that is going to be evaluated, the drain, the mental toll of being in touch with the entirety of of the earth all at once. Like, so
I
much
think you're onto
access.
that. I feel that.
I sense that definitely. There are some moments where I cannot touch my phone. It's like I don't want to touch my phone. And there are some moments where I lose myself in the stroll, in the scroll as
Same.
well.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I can also tell how that is hindering my capacity to connect with my kids or to be there with Renee. And so
I
definitely,
feel that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, one thing I would love to ask you, and there's one question that I've asked everybody who comes onto this podcast. I spent the biggest part of last year writing a book called Scars of Gold, and it's coming. It'll be published later this year.
Nice.
And basically, the intent. I feel like so many people like you who are possessed by a mission. Let me just put it that way. Usually, it started with a sacred wound that eventually turned into a scar of gold, meaning it amplified purpose mission. And I wonder what that was for you. Or are you aware of a specific wounding that turned out to be the scar of gold that lit a
Mm.
fire within you?
Man, it's so hard to choose one because they've
Mm,
all. But I'd say the moment that woke me up was the leaving of the engagement. That was the first time I ever asked myself, why do I do what I do?
yeah,
And why do I do things I don't want to do?
yeah,
Why am I ways I don't want to be? That was the first time I ever turned towards myself as a self, as if I had choice about these things. I was living the check marks and the like, get this job, make this money, become this fit, whatever it was. And it was the first time I actually asked myself, what do I want and what do I not want? Because I left
yeah,
the engagement. So now I had access to, I can actually say no to things that don't feel aligned, even if I don't understand them, because I didn't understand why I didn't want to be married to someone who is and was really great. That didn't make sense to me.
yeah.
So I'd say it's that. And what's really, I went to this workshop that was called Shamanism Meets Psychotherapy.
Mm,
It was really interesting. And I was in a meditation. It was a 4 directions meditation.
yeah.
And she said, go back to the original wound. And I was like, I know where that is. Like 19 years old, betrayed by my girlfriend. I'm like, got it. And then she said, don't go where you think it is. Let it arrive. And I was like,
Mm,
ooh, but she called my shit out right away.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I was in a hospital and I was watching my mom be taken from me. And I started crying. And I said, I was like, man, that's not what I expected. Like it was somatic. Like there was no words. I didn't even know this existed, this memory.
Yeah.
But then I texted my dad because I knew my dad would respond pretty quickly. And I was like, hey, dad. And they're like used to me. So
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, dad, I'm in this workshop and I did this meditation, blah, blah. And he said to me, you were born. I was like, how long was I in the hospital? Because I was born premature.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, oh, well, you wanted to come so eagerly to life that you were born 6 weeks early.
He is
He's
a
like,
poet.
yeah, he's so funny. He's like wanting the positive orientation of this
Yeah.
experience. And he said, after 10 days in the NICU, you were brought home by 2 very eager and excited parents.
Mm,
And I remember being like, okay, cool. Like 10 days. That's how long I was there. For 3 months, I would cry randomly. I remember talking to my wife in the backyard of her parents' place. And I was like, I just don't even know why I'm sad. I would just cry. I was crying saying that. And I remember talking to the woman who ran that workshop, and she said it's because a lot of pain is pre-verbal. Like you can't label it. There's no word to it because words didn't exist.
yeah.
And so I think of that like what would be considered like the wound that runs my life and why I'm anxiously attached and why I want to please be. It was like that is the origin of the sacred because I've now taken that and instead of it being the reason I have problems in my life, it is the reason that I am so passionate about love and connection and has actually become, I think all wounds and survival strategies become superpowers, much like your book is about. It's like this sacred wound. And so I'd say like there's the cognitive one, which is the engagement ending, but there's the developmental, like this is my curriculum
Yeah.
of being premature.
Yeah. Would you say that part of the healing was you taking being the one that would reject the or who would say no to, because in that moment being in a hospital bed, you're a baby. There's nothing
Yeah.
you can do, and this person is taken away from you. And would you say part of the power reclamation was you being the one who would say, I want your love, but I will not settle for your absent presence. It's
Yeah.
like you are there but not really fully here, not fully choosing to be here. Would you say it was a power reclamation in there?
Yeah, and it's so easy to be like, well, it's not your mom's fault that you were in an incubator, and of course, but to a child, to a baby who's new to the world, not having mom is death. And so we have this imprint in our nervous system that is, if people are not close to me, I die. So I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to shape shift. I'm going to become everything I need. I'm going to make sure I'm important. I take care of people. And so, yeah, it for sure was like no longer on other people's terms.
Yeah.
Like if you can't be here, which allows the grief of the original experience to exist, that it's not like
Yes.
anyone's fault, but it's true.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
we want to manage the shame or guilt that the mother has in my mom in that moment. But it's actually just acknowledging the truth that allows her grief of not being able to be with me to be acknowledged,
Yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
there's such a, and had I not been a C-section and an NICU baby, I wouldn't be here. So
Yeah.
there's such a appreciation for that. I would be dead in previous generations.
Yeah.
So what a beautiful thing that is.
Yeah. I love that so much. And just as a way of, I mean, also noticing how you've chosen to reclaim, um to make something more powerful emerge from that. That's amazing. And the last question I would love to ask you is, the title of this show is Enheartened, and basically it's about bringing into our heart the aspects of ourselves that we've learned to disown. And
Mm,
I wonder, what is a part of you that you're still learning to love in this moment?
mm. I think it's still I still have residue of learning to love the fierce advocate of justice and truth.
Yeah.
Um, because, as you said earlier, it has come at great cost. And so there's this, it's really interesting because it's almost like there's this reluctance to surrender into the full nature of it, yet knowing I don't have a choice, yet I'm trying to slow that process,
Yes.
but realizing that I can't. And so life is giving me a choice till it doesn't, which I'm aware of, and so I've moved towards that. And what I know to be true, which is so much different to live, is that actually when you embrace it, then you're in abundance, and then abundance flows. So there's this strange. It's like that thing I wrote, when you trade a truth, you trade it for a truth you need. When you don't live a truth, you know. And so there's this. I write that because I know it. I know
Yeah.
the cost, and that's why that quote, that faith is insecurity, resonates so much with me, because there's what is still being integrated is the trust in the power of myself, but also being fearful of the power, if that makes sense. And not
Yeah.
from like an arrogant place that I'm more powerful than anyone else. It's just that, like, I have developed a gift in a certain direction, much like everybody has a gift that is usually cultivated from their wounds and their
Yeah.
survival strategy. Usually, it's always. And so, yeah, I think that's still, there's residue. There's like not full integration there. I don't
Yeah.
think I know.
Yeah. I mean, whatever it's worth, I think in the ways you're allowing yourself to advocate from a, I want to say, as much of a heart-centered way as you possibly can. Um, to me, at the very least, it's something to be celebrated, So
Thanks.
I just wanted to mention that, and also I just want to just thank you for choosing to have such an open-hearted conversation and to share so much wisdom. I really appreciate that. And I wonder if let's say people tune into this podcast and they're like, I want to get into the universe of Mark. Where can they, how can they get into your world?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram because I returned with Sovereign Choice
Yep.
to create the love. And you could just look up my name. I also have a personal one called It's Mark Groves, and I talk about more sharp material, let's
Spicy.
call it. Yeah, spicy stuff there. That's not necessarily in the context of relationship.
Yeah.
And I have a podcast which I just made the choice from that like integrated place to only do solo episodes from now on.
Yeah.
And that felt like a real alignment. And then, so you can find me on markgroves.com or createthelove.com.
Yeah.
Both will lead to wherever anyone wants to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much
Thanks so
for
much.
showing up. Thank you so much for your work. And it's been illuminating to be in conversation with you.
It's been such an honor. You're such a great interviewer, and I really appreciate this conversation.